This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Shalom Yisrael. Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. We're already holding in the 9 days. We're already beyond the period of the 3 weeks. We're already close to Shvuah Shechal by Tisha B'Av. And the Dinei Avelos, the laws of mourning, are intensifying. We try to bring into focus a little bit what Churban means to us, what Tisha B'Av means to us. And the Gemara tells us in Masechta Tainis on that Chavav Amabez that on that faithful day, on that ominous day of Tisha B'Av, the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, 5 tragedies happened. The Mishnah says, Nigzar ala v'seinu shlo yichnesu la'aretz. There was a terrible decree that the 600,000 men, between 20 and 60, none of them would make it into Eretz Yisrael because of the Chet HaMeraglim. And then, V'charav habayis barishayna, the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Ubishniya, the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. V'nilkada Beitar, Beitar was captured. V'nechresha ha'ir, the city was plowed over. Many tragedies, 5 tragedies happened on Tisha B'Av. Now this is a Mishnah. The Mishnah was redacted by Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi lived in the 2nd century, in the year 188 of the Common Era. But even since that time, there have been many tragedies that also occurred on Tisha B'Av. The great city of Alexandria, which was even bigger than Beitar, was also destroyed on Tisha B'Av. And it's brought down over here from the Sefer HaToidah that from the destruction already, the first Beis HaMikdash, when Jews left Eretz Yisrael, many Jews of course went to Bavel, but Jews already made their way to Europe after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash, and in fact many Jews went to Spain. Ezra comes back to build the second Beis HaMikdash, Ezra Nehemiah, Zerubbabel, Yeshua Kohen Gadol, and not all the Jews returned. Many Jews remained in Europe, many Jews remained in Spain. But upon the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, as many Jews that had already been in Spain, even more Jews came to Spain after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, approximately in the year 68 of the Common Era. So here you have these 2 groups of Jews in Spain, Jews who had been there already for 480 years, since the time of Churban Bayis Rishon. You have Jews who can make their way since Bayis Sheni. And for 1400 years there was a major Jewish community in Spain. Approximately in the year 600 of the Common Era, upon the fall of the great academies in Bavel, Sura and Pumbedisa, Spain became the epicenter of Torah Jewry. Now I wanted you to get a little picture for a moment. There's an expression, the golden age of Spain. Right? Everybody knows the golden age of Spain. It's a scam. It never happened. There's no such thing. The golden age of Spain, you have to know, Jewish history is relative. The golden age of Spain. From the year 600 to the year 1492, there were massacres, pogroms, non-stop. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were burnt, murdered, converted. So when we say the golden age of Spain, there was a very small window. Ironically, as long as the Christians maintained control of Spain, we were tortured, persecuted, and murdered. The only peace we had was a small window, 200 years, when the Mohammedans overtook Spain. So that's what we're dealing with. Throughout history, there's always the great debate, who's better and who's worse? Where are we better off? Are we better off in the Christian world, or are we better off in the Arab world, the Muslim world? And today, we can answer the question very definitively where we're better off. And yet at other times in history, it was the exact opposite. That the Christians were bloodthirsty. The definition of Christianity is murder. So is the definition of Islam. But over certain periods of time, the golden age of Spain was only a 200 out of the 1400 years that we were in Spain. From approximately the year 68 of the Common Era until 1492, it was one persecution, one massacre, one forced conversion after another. So why is it called the Golden Age of Spain? Says Rabbi Kitov, this is a classic Jewish phenomenon. And that is, when we look back at Galus, we say, oh, how wonderful it was over there. Like when we left Mitzrayim. Oh, Egypt, it was wonderful in Egypt. The cucumbers in Egypt, I never had such good, right? Zacharnu es hadaga. Cucumbers in Egypt. They murdered our children. They built them into the walls. Only four-fifths didn't make it. What are we remembering so fondly about Mitzrayim? The answer is, that's Jewish nature. You look back at a certain period, you focus in, you hone in on a few good years, and you say, it was wonderful back then. Spanish Jewry was one massacre after another. And you have to remember that. The golden age of Spain is somewhat of a misconception. It was really a very small window. What we're going to do tonight, we may know a lot of information about the Spanish Inquisition. We may know information from secular sources, but what we would like to do tonight is examine through the writings of the Achronim, through the writings of the Shalos HaTshuvos, the historical background based on the writings of various Gedolei Yisrael who lived during that period, to try to get a true understanding of what happened, and maybe also get a little bit of an understanding why did it happen, what did the Gedolei Yisrael have to say about why these tragedies were happening. And we're going to start off with the writings of the Abarbanel. Rabbi Don Yitzchak Abarbanel, who lived from 1508, he passed away, he was born in 1438. 1438 to 1508. Beis Yosef writes about the Abarbanel in Arachayim Sim Kuf Sam Aches. He calls him Hanesher Hagadol. Hanesher Hagadol. The Abarbanel was a prolific writer. Abarbanel wrote a trilogy about the Mos HaMashiach. He wrote Migdal Yeshuais, 3 volumes, Yeshuais Mashiachai, Mayonei HaYeshua, a commentary on Sefer Daniel, and Mashmiya Yeshua. Abarbanel wrote Nachlas Avos and Perkei Avos. He wrote Zevach Pesach on the Haggadah. He wrote a commentary on the Moreh Nevuchim. And he was what we call Choiter Migeza Yishai. He was a direct descendant of David HaMelech. The Abarbanel begins his introductions by writing, he is a descendant of David HaMelech, of King David. Abarbanel starts off his career in Portugal. He's the finance minister for King Alfonso of Portugal. 1481, King Alfonso dies, and he's taken over by his son, Joao, Wao, with a little zarka on top of the A. Wao II, and Wao II, he comes into power and he begins to execute all of his father's ministers. The only last standing minister is Abarbanel, whereupon Abarbanel gets, an email, right? He says, Wao would like to speak to you. And he gets word that Wao doesn't want to speak to him, Wao wants to cut off his head. So he runs out of the palace, he runs for his life out of Portugal, he makes his way into Spain just as the persecutors are about to grab him. So Abarbanel comes to Spain in the year 1484. Comes to Spain, 1484, and nobody knows who he is, which is always a good thing for a rabbi. It's not good if people know who you are. You're always better off being undercover. Okay. And Abarbanel tells us, take a look, we're going to glean from various commentaries of Abarbanel, from his writings on Sefer Hosea, from his writings on Sefer Yirmiyahu, and from his writings on Sefer Malachim. Says Abarbanel, we all know that many tragedies happened to the Jewish people on Tisha B'Av. The Chet HaMeraglim, Churban Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Sheni, Beitar, Tornis Rufus, destroyed the Heichal. Alexandria was destroyed, but says Abarbanel, what else can I say? He says on the 7th line in number 3, V'hinezeh hashmad ha'achroin, this last persecution, we compared it to the exile from Yerushalayim, because the king and the queen, they made a decree that in 3 months the Jews have to convert or they're out of here. Says Abarbanel, ominously, the end of that 3-month period fell out on, guess what date? Tisha B'Av. And how do we remember what date of the Jewish calendar this came out on? Well, in the year 1492, Reish Nun Beis, which is the gematria of the pasuk in Yirmiyah, Mizarei Yisrael Yikabtzenu, the scattered Jew, he will gather. Mizarei is the gematria 1492. In other words, Mizarei is 252. 252 in the Jewish calendar. I'll tell you a little trick. Whenever you see a Hebrew date, if you want to translate it into a secular date, you add the year 1240. So 252, you add 1240 to it, is 1492. How do you remember what year? Mizare Yisrael Yekabten. As we're going to see, various Achronim would find different remazim in the Psukim to this ominous year of 1492. Says Abarbanel, Be'etzem Hayoim Hazeh, on this very day, the day of Tisha B'Av, Yatsu Kol Tzivos Hashem Mikal Artzos Sfard. Every last Jew remained in Sfard. If you're Jewish and you remained in Spain, you had denounced your Judaism. You had become a Marrano.
Oh, what was Marrano? The state.
Anyone who claimed to be a Jew had to leave on Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh. Says the Abarbanel, this is the meaning of the pasuk. Ata yoichlem chodesh es chalkeim. The month will consume their remnant, which means like this: Tisha B'Av, the first time, will destroy a majority of the Jewish people. Tisha B'Av, the second time, will knock off a big part of them. But there'll still be a remnant in Spain. And Tisha B'Av again will come in and knock off the remnant of the Jewish people, says Abarbanel. Abarbanel continues in his commentary of Sefer Yirmiyahu. He adds that aside from all the tragedies mentioned in Masechta Tainis, he says there's an island. If you look again on the 7th line in number 5, there's an island on the other side of the land, Hanikra Inglaterra. What's Inglaterra? In French, what England is called Inglaterra. Inglaterra is referring to England. The Jews were expelled from England on Tisha B'Av. On that year, that day, in the year 1295, the year Kala Garesh Garesh, Kala. The word Kala. Kala is, right? 55, in the year 1295, we were chased out of France. Says Abarbanel, on Tisha B'Av 1492, King Ferdinand decreed that will be the Makabeh Patish. That will be the final blow. On that day, every last Jew has to leave Spain. Says Abarbanel, what? King Ferdinand learned the Gemara in Tainis. He was familiar that he should dafka kick the Jews out on Tisha B'Av. How do we explain this? Says Abarbanel, V'hu lo yada mizeh hazman davar. King Ferdinand had no clue it was Tisha B'Av. Ki'ilu min hashamayim hidrichu lahagbalas hazman. It was as if the hand of God guided him unknowingly to somehow make this decree to end on Tisha B'Av. He didn't know about it. Says Abarbanel, this is the fruition of the nevuah. Bechadasha yimtzaunha. Look at number 4. The pasuk says in Yirmiyah, at the end of the pasuk, Bechadsha yimtzaunha. Klal Yisrael will always be found. Her sins will always be visited on that fateful month, on that fateful day, the 9th day of Av. Comes Abarbanel in a third place, and he gives us perhaps the most extensive and authentic account of the Spanish Inquisition of any of the Gdolei Yisrael. And in the Abarbanel's Hakdam, in his introduction to Sefer Malachim, Sefer Malachim, of course, is the 4th book of the Navi. So you have Yoshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Malachim. Abarbanel tells us what prompted him to write a commentary on these 4 books. Says Abarbanel, I, a descendant of David HaMelech, I compare myself to Chiel Beis Ha'eli. Who's Chiel Beis Ha'eli? Chiel Beis Ha'eli was the one who violated the curse of Yeshua ben Nun. Yeshua ben Nun said, whoever builds up the city of Yericho will lay the foundation with the death of his oldest son, and will put up the gate with the death of their youngest son. Says Abarbanel, I am the exact opposite of Chiel Beis Ha'eli. Very mysterious comment. In what way is Abarbanel like this individual? Says Abarbanel, let me tell you my life story. He says, I was sitting in Portugal. I was at peace. I had security. I had serenity. And I embarked upon a mission to write a commentary on Tanakh. However, suddenly, the emperor, the king of Portugal, was turned on me. He considered me an enemy, to the point where I had to flee for my life. And I run away to Malchus Castelaya, to Castile, the region of Castile. And I'm there, nobody knows who I am. A lot of Jews had beards back then. Nobody knows who's about. So Abarbanel says, it's a perfect opportunity. I have peace. I have serenity. I'm going to write a commentary on Yehoshua. Why Yoshua? Because God saved me. Why Shoftim? Because God is a Shofet Emes. Why Shmuel? Because this is my request from God. Says Abarbanel, I came to Spain in the year 1484. And I began to write a commentary. Not only on Yeshua, Shoftim, and Shmuel, but I wanted to write a commentary on Sefer Melachim. And all of a sudden, I'm summoned to the palace of the king. And King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella say, Yidala, you're the new finance minister of, what should we invest in? What stocks should we buy? Where should we put our cash? Where should we invest? What real estate should we buy? Says the Abarbanel, I made them successful. I made them wealthy. I elevated them to the great level that they were on. However, in 1492, in the year Mizarei Yisrael, King Ferdinand won a great victory. He attacked Granada and the great city of Granada, and he conquered Granada. King Ferdinand conquered Granada, and he returns from war victorious. This was one of the greatest victories in world history, the conquest of Granada. He annexed Granada to his Malchus. And this arrogant king says to himself, how can I ever repay my God? How can I ever show gratitude to the newly embraced Christianity? We know that in 1492, pretty recently, Spain had embraced the Christian religion. And says Abarbanel, Vayomer Esav Belibai. Esav, Rome, Christianity. King Ferdinand said, Bama es ratzel elokei. How can I appease my God? The only thing I could do is gather all of those miserable Jews, all those Jews that walk in darkness, and bring them to the true religion, and if they don't accept, I will kick them out. Says Abarbanel, Yatsa dvar hamelech v'dasai, like the das of Paras Umadai. And the law went out that anyone living in Eretz Sfarad and Sicily was a part of the Spanish Empire, or Majorca, or Sardinia, any Jew either leaves or converts. Abarbanel says, I was sitting in the palace, couldn't keep my mouth closed. I risked my life. I screamed to the king, King, save these people. What do you want for them? 3 lines from the end. Lama tase kol avadecha. Why are you doing this? You want money? You need more money? We will pay you a hefty ransom for every Jew. Money's not an issue. Says Abarbanel, I pleaded with the officers. I pleaded with the officials. By the way, you should know that on the last day, before the Inquisition was formally signed, Abarbanel pleaded with Ferdinand, and they were really about to reconsider. Whereupon the great and terrible Inquisitor, Torquemada was the confessor of Queen Isabella. He comes running into the palace room with a big cross, ranting and raving, and he shook King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to their core. They got so scared, they asked Abarbanel to step out. The edict was signed, and it was completed Tisha B'Av, August 2nd, Thursday, 1492.
His last word to Abarbanel.
Says Abarbanel, as bad as King Ferdinand was, it's always the wife. Yeah? Look, 3 lines from the top. He says, "V'hamalka imedes al yaminoi l'sitnoi." She's sitting there on the side. She's inciting him. So Abarbanel blames her. Says Abarbanel, since Galus Yerushalayim, we never had such a tragedy. Says Abarbanel, how many Jews were forced to leave Spain in that 3-month period? Primarily, between Yezayin Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, 300,000 Jews had to leave Spain. How many Jews converted? Hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. We're going to learn that 101 years before the Inquisition, there was another fourth conversion. 200,000 Jews converted to Christianity. The first time in history there was almost any conversion to a different religion. 200,000. And this is something that did not go unnoticed by the Gedolei Yisrael. First time in history First time in history, Jews converted to another religion. Why? What was it about Spanish Jewry? What was their weakness? 200,000 Jews in 1391, hundreds of thousands in 1492, 30,000 Jews were murdered in 1492. Now you should know, we talk about the Marranos, the secret Jews. Well, in 1492, there were more than 250,000 new Christians, Marranos. The Marranos had it much worse off than the Jews. By the way, the word Marrano, do you know what the word Marrano means? A pig, a chazer. Marrano means chazer. Why did they call them chazerim? Well, a chazer gets fat on other people's efforts. So these Jews that converted to Christianity, they were so upset with them, as if they're having success because of all the hard work of the Christians. And also they call them chazerim, they call them pigs, because a pig only has use when you kill it. They call them Marranos. They dubbed them the title Marrano. In other words, you Jews, you'll never be us. You only have value when we slice your necks. You only have value when we burn you in the fire. So the Marranos had it much worse off. Because the Jews who remained Jews, they had a choice. Either conversion or expulsion. But the Marranos were not given the opportunity to leave anymore. Once they converted to Christianity, they were spied on, they were followed day and night, making sure they would never utter a word to any other Jew. They were followed to make sure they were not performing any Jewish rituals. They weren't going to shul, they weren't even looking at Jews. And their lives were miserable. The worst thing that they did was that they converted openly. Now, you should know that many of the Marranos eventually came back and were Makadeshim Shamayim. But unfortunately, in that 101-year period, from 1391 to 1492, aside from 300,000 Jews that left the country, we lost Nebuch, hundreds of thousands of Jews to Christianity.
Spain traces back to which, Golas, Shmuel?
No, so it's from Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. It's not part of the Dalgos. Okay, so says Abarbanel, how many Jews left Spain 1492? 300,000. He says, and I'm among them, because Abarbanel was given exclusive rights to be the only Jew to remain in the country. And he was able to remain as the finance minister of Spain. And instead he chose to go along with his fellow brethren. Says Abarbanel, as we're walking and we're leaving the country, says Abarbanel, V'yatsa malkam lifneihem b'Hashem b'rosham. Our king walked ahead of us. That is God Almighty. He was leading us out of this galus. And where did we go? Says Abarbanel, we had no idea where we're going. Some went to Portugal, others went to Navarre. Not the pharmacy on El and Nostrand, right? But a different place. Navarre. And, says Abarbanel, we suffered. We were broken. We were hungry. Many of them took ships. Many of the ships sunk. Many of them were capsized. Many of them burnt. I myself, says Abarbanel, I chose to take a ship. And where did I end up? I ended up in Italy. In Napoli. Now, very interesting. Abarbanel had lost his manuscript on Sefer Devarim. He goes to Napoli. He makes his way to Corfu. In Corfu, he finds a Yid who had accidentally one time made a copy of his manuscripts of Devarim, and he was able to reprint his Sefer on Devarim. Says the Abarbanel, what happened? I arrived in Napoli in the year 1493, the year Gerim Hayisem, Gerim, 1493. And I said to myself, now I have to pay up my debt. I promised God I was going to write Yoshua, I did that. Shoftim, I did that. Shmuel, I did. Now I have to write a commentary on Sefer Malachim. Says Abarbanel, I'm like Chiel from Beis Eli. Chiel Beis Eli lost his oldest son when he put up the foundation of Yerichai. He lost his youngest son when he put up the gates. I'm the exact opposite. I wrote my first commentary in the youngest of the Gullus, in the most mild of the Gullus, when I had to leave Portugal, 1484. And I wrote my most important commentary on Malachim in the Bechar Gullus, in the great Gullus of Gullus Sepharad. So this is the writing of the Abarbanel. The Tzemach David was the Talmud of the Ramah. Tzemach David, very interesting. Rav David Gans was born in Germany as a little kid. He walked from Germany to Krakow. One day, he had a tshuka to learn from the Ramah. So he left his home, and he walked from Germany to Krakow. Not from Kew Gardens to Kew Garden Hills. Germany to Krakow. He made his way to the Ramah's house. By the way, the Tzemach David was a master of many disciplines. Mathematics, astronomy. By the way, he corresponded with the great astronomers of the time. Tycho Brahe, Johann Kepler. There's correspondence between the Tzemach David and Johann Kepler. Says the Tzemach David, he was encouraged by the Ramah to write a historical work. Says the Tzemach David, you want to remember what year the Spanish Inquisition was? The Pasuk, Rabim b'nei Shoimema. Great was our desolation. Rabim, Reish, Beis, Yud, Mem, 252, 1492. Again, another remez to the Spanish Inquisition. We have over here the Sefer Seder HaDoros of Rabbi Chil Halpern. Chil Halpern was a great historian. His historical work is so important that the Chida wrote footnotes on the Seder HaDoros. And the Rabbi Chil Halpern writes, by the way, he was a descendant of the Marshal, descendant of Rashi, a descendant of the Tana, Rabbi Yochanan HaSandler. And he writes the following. The Jews were exiled from all the great cities in Spain. And the residents of Toledo, holy Toledo, they say to the Inquisitor, what do you want from us? Don't you see? Why were they killing Jews? Because we killed their God. But we didn't! The Romans did! Yeah, but we were there and we didn't protest. But the residents of Toledo said, don't you know? We've been here since Bayis Rishon. It was even engraved in the stones of Toledo that the Jewish community never even saw the Yozel. They've been there since Bayis Rishon. They didn't want to hear from it. They left. The Abarbanel writes, they left, but they couldn't take their money with them. You know how much money they had? You know, we get German reparations. We need somebody to get money back from the Spanish. This community in Toledo had 30 million ducats. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And they had to leave. Says the Seder HaDoros, the entire Teichacha was fulfilled to the Gerushay Sfarad. Says the Seder HaDoros, let me tell you an incident that happened. There was one particular person who left on a boat with his father, with his aged father, and little son. They land on a desert island, there's nothing to eat. Nebuch, the grandfather, is dying of hunger. The father doesn't know what to do. He has nothing to feed his father. He takes his kid to the baker. He tells the baker, father's dying, I need to feed him. He trades in his kid for a loaf of bread to bring to his ailing father. Comes back to the father. The father had already gone to the next world. Goes back to the baker. Give me my kid back. The baker says, no, keep the bread. The baker says, keep the bread. Says the Seder HaDoros, one of the most terrible things I ever heard. The Jews are leaving Spain. They're coming to Portugal. 300,000. If you want to read about it, he says, there's a great historian, Yehuda Chayat. The Jews in Portugal go to the king of Portugal. They said, we don't want these Jews coming from Spain. We don't want them coming. They're going to jack up the prices. Right now I have room at the Shiur. I could sit back. One portion per person, maybe sometimes 2 portions per person, right? If those Jews from Spain come, that's it. Maybe I'll get 1 French fry at the Shiur. The Jews of Portugal asked the king, do not let them come. Do not let them come. And the Gadol in Portugal, Don Yosef ben Yechia, he said, what are you doing? You're going to close the doors to your brethren? They didn't listen to him. And the Jews of Spain could not enter Spain. They had to pay 2 ducats a head to allow them into Portugal. What happened was, they come to Portugal, there's so many Jews, there's pestilence, people are dying, everybody wants to leave Portugal. The king gets word, you want to leave Portugal now? The king makes an investigation if everybody paid the 2 ducats. Whoever didn't pay the 2 ducats, the king says, now I'm not taking 2 ducats. Now I take your kid, any kid between 6 and 10. King of Portugal took. Parents never saw their kids again. Rabbi Avraham Saba, one of the great Gerushei Sfarad, he wrote the commentary Tzar Amar. He had 2 sons taken by the king of Portugal, never saw them again. What happened? The king of Portugal sees everybody is leaving the country. He makes a big reception for all the wealthy Balabatim in Portugal. He says, come to my palace. He serves them a big course. He locks the gates of the palace. And he says the following, you're not going anywhere. He has water poured on every kid's head. He forcibly kidnaps, baptizes every child in Portugal under the age of 18. If you were a father, if you were a mother living in Portugal in the year 1497, you never saw your child again without exception. Without exception. There are many sources of it. Rabbi Avraham Saba writes about this. If you were a parent in Portugal, take two. Somewhere else. You never saw your kids again. Says the Seder HaDoros. They took ships, they took boats. Where did they go? They went to Italy. Many went to Italy. The Jews in Italy didn't want these Jews. So they went to the Pope. They said, Pope, what are you kidding me? You're going to let these immigrants in? You know what the Pope said? He said, what? You don't have mercy on your own brethren? I'm going to take in the Gerushe Sfarad, and you guys, you're out of here. And he put a decree on all of the residents of Rome. He was Megarish them. And they had to pay thousands and thousands of ruble, of thousands of silver coins in order to extricate themselves from this gzeira.
What are neighbors today? What do they do like this?
We'll see. Okay. By the way, one of the other great Gedolei Yisrael who lived in Sfarad in the time, one of the other great Gerushe Sfarad, was somebody by the name of Rabbi Yosef Eyewitness, the Chassid Eyewitness. Now he has no relation to Rabbi Yaakov Emden. In fact, Eyewitness of the Chassid Eyewitness stands for Yitain Eitza Be'ez Tzara. Eyewitness. He was your go-to councilman. If you needed advice, you went to the Chassid Eyewitness. Chassid Eyewitness wrote a great work called Or HaChaim. The Or HaChaim is such an important work that the author of the Bnei Yissaschar, Tzvi Elimelech Midinov, wrote extensive hagois on the Or HaChaim of the Chassid Eyewitness. I once heard from one of my Rosh Yeshiva, who heard from one of the Balei Musar of Zaychik, that if somebody wants to gain Yiras Shamayim, they should learn the Sfarim of the Chassid Eyewitness. In one of the footnotes on the Chassid Eyewitness, also another remez to the year 1492, there's a pasuk in Tanakh that says, Biron Yachad Koichvei Bak Boikar. Biron, Gematria 1492. Biron stands for also Re'eh Na Be'anyenu, also another remez to the Spanish Inquisition. Says Rabbi Yosef Eyewitness. By the way, why did he write the Sefer Or HaChaim? The Sefer Or HaChaim was written in distinction to argue with the approach of the philosophers. Rabbi Yosef Eyewitness was very against the study of philosophy. And Rabbi Yosef Eyewitness wants to know, very simple question in his Sefer Or HaChaim. Alma Avda Golos Farad. What did they do wrong? What did they do? What was their Avera? What was their Avera? Alma Avda Haaretz. He says, we can't even begin to speak about the desperation in the year 1492. Says Rabbi Yosef Eyewitness, the same way the Navi Yirmiyah says, Al Azvam es Tairasi, that they forsook the Torah. In Spain, they forsook the Torah. How did we forsake the Torah, says Chassid Eyewitness? 1492, there were never so many yeshivas in Spain or anywhere in the world as there were in 1492. Says the Chassid Eyewitness, let me go through the situation. He said you had some Talmidim that would stay in the yeshiva 6 or 7 years. But after that, they would move on to more sophisticated disciplines. They considered secular disciplines more advanced, more scholarly, more sophisticated. And to some extent, they forsook Limud HaTorah. That's why they were punished. There were other Jews, he said, who, after leaving the yeshiva, they forsook the Torah entirely. But he said, even the great Talmidei Chachamim, they were not learning for the purpose of learning. What's the purpose of learning? He said the highest purpose of learning is to learn to be mizdavek to Hashem, to be a righteous individual. But they were not even learning to know what to do halacha l'maisa. They were only learning lehisgadel, lehispire, to gain honor, to gain titles. In fact, you should know, the Abarbanel writes that when he came to Naples in 1492, he writes this in the beginning of the 6th parak of Pirkei Avos. He saw a very strange phenomenon, that there were Jews that called themselves rabbi. He says to them, "What's a rabbi? What, you have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu?" So they said, "No, we have smicha." The Rabbi said, "What's smicha? There's no such thing. V'samach yadai arosh hapar." What's smicha? Smicha was interrupted. What's smicha? Says Abarbanel, smicha is something that's far into the Jewish people. He says, you know where it comes from? It comes from the secular world, where they have doctors, so we try to mimic them. We have rabbis. But either you know the Torah or you don't know the Torah. Either you know the Shulchan Aruch or you don't know the Shulchan Aruch. What's a rabbi, says Abarbanel. Okay, obviously that was his opinion, but it's a very interesting thing. Says the Chassid Eyewitness, the sin was that the learning was not l'shem shamayim. It was to make a career, to get a title. Says the Chassid Eyewitness on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, "B'al tamein ba'atzmecha yoy moischa." You can never trust yourself. He says this is toichacha megula. This is a response to those who say, "Yeah, I've mastered Torah. Now let me master chachma chitzainis. Let me master other disciplines." Says the Chassid Eyewitness, you can never trust yourself enough to say that you've already learned enough and now you could try mastering other things. And then he makes a very frightening comment. Says the Chassid Eyewitness, in 1492, all the Jews who studied philosophy and were chayker and investigated proofs to God's existence and God's providence, you know what their fate was? Every last one of them became a Christian. And the fate of the simple Jews who had emunah pshuta was they remained loyal to Judaism. Says the Chassid Eyewitness, the downfall of Spanish Jewry was they did not first involve themselves enough in Shas and Poskim before they investigated the philosophical realms of the Torah. And the proof is in the results. Because all the great Chachamim and all the great Philosophim, they all met the same fate. They all converted. They were not able to withstand the great test. And the Jews who had simple emunah from the traditions of their ancestors, they were the only Jews who were able to overcome this great nisayon. Rabbi said this is a very major topic. We're going to be skipping over a number of the Marranos. If anybody wants to hear part 2 of this series, we're going to be giving it in the Young Israel, Mirz Hashem, Friday morning and Sunday morning here in the shul. But we're just going to be getting a little taste for this tekifa. 10 o'clock in the Young Israel. Kew Garden Hills. Okay, details I'll let you know. I'll let you know more. Rabbi Sai, I want to tell you about another great Gadol b'Yisrael who lived during that tekufa. His name was Rabbi Avraham Zakuto. Rabbi Avraham Zakuto was one of the most interesting Gadol b'Yisrael, and it's a name that everybody should be familiar with. Rabbi Avraham Zakuto lived from 1440 to 1515. A great Talmudist, a great Talmud Chacham, a great historian, and perhaps the greatest astronomer of all time. In fact, Rabbi Avraham Zakuto wrote a great work, a classic work, called Sefer HaYuchsin HaShalem, which he was not zoche to see published during his lifetime. The Sefer HaYuchsin HaShalem was published after the death, posthumously, I believe in the year 1566.
Where are you now?
I'm in Spain in the year 1492 right now, right? But he was not zoche to see the Sefer published. I'm number 18. And he writes about the great merit that he had. Then when he was exiled from Spain in 1492, him and his son were persecuted, were exiled, were captured many times. And the Rebbeinu Shalom gave them the great zechus not to give in, to be mekadesh shem shamayim, and to withstand the nisayon. Says Rabbi Avraham Zakuto in the introduction to the Sefer HaYuchsin, an amazing story. Avraham Zakuto wrote the most authoritative maritime charts. In fact, when Rabbi Avraham Zakuto came out with his maritime charts, he put to shame all of the earlier maritime charts. To the point, now, he also invented one of the most important traveling tools of the time, the astrolabe. Until Rabbi Avraham Zakuto, the astrolabe was a wooden instrument, which was very inaccurate. Rabbi Avraham Zakuto perfected the copper astrolabe. He had many conversations with a man by the name of Christophe Columbus. Yeah? Know what that is? And before Columbus sailed to America, they had a major discussion. By the way, Rabbi Avraham Zakuto was offered to be an instructor in the university in Salamanca, and Columbus studied from Rabbi Avraham Zakuto. In fact, the great astronomer Korea writes that the only scholar that believed that Columbus would discover new land was Rabbi Avraham Zakuto. He actually wrote that it's going to be very hard to get by a certain impasse, but once you get beyond it, he believes land will be discovered.
Did he invest with him? That's the question.
Okay. An amazing story. An amazing story. When Christopher Columbus came to America, and actually he was captured by Indians. Maybe cannibals, they tied him up, him and his men. They're going to put him in a pot, cook him for supper.
Kosher?
And Christopher Columbus didn't know what to do. And you remember that in the maritime charts of Rabbi Avraham Zakuto, a lunar eclipse was predicted almost immediately. Wow. So Christopher Columbus said to the captors that if you don't release me, I will pray to my God and blot out the light of the moon. Whereupon Christopher Columbus was mispalel, leilei kav, and all of a sudden, these Indians they're looking at the moon disappear, and they probably did their dance and they made their noises, and they heaped great honor on Columbus. They untied him and they assisted him on the rest of his travels, as recorded in the Sefer HaYochsin HaSholem of Rabbi Avraham Zakuto. By the way, I wasn't there. I can't tell you more details. But if you go today,
Rabbi, was he Jewish? Christopher Columbus.
Very likely he was Jewish. If you go today to the museum in Portugal, you could see the maritime charts of Avraham Zakuto with the footnotes of Christopher Columbus. You can see today. Avraham Zakuto discusses a very important shaila, how he saw with his own eyes, 1492, when the Jews were threatened, either exile or conversion, many Jews committed suicide. And the question is, halachically, is it permitted to commit suicide to save yourself from great distress? And stay tuned if you want to hear more about that. You could come Sunday morning, and we're going to see the psak halacha of Rabbi Avraham Zakuto, as long as other halacha lamaisa hilchos Marranos. Okay.
Friday or Sunday?
Both. You have two opportunities. Okay. Rabbi Sai, one of the great historians of the time. What? One of the great historians of the time.
A big baby.
Shevet Yehuda, one of the great historians of the time. Yeah. Rabbi Sai, the Shevet Yehuda. Shevet Yehuda writes in number 26. He says, I heard from one of the elders of the Gerushe Sfarad of a man and his wife and his two children who are on a boat, and the boat capsizes. They're stuck on a desert island. They're all famished. They're all malnourished. They're all near death. This wife was a wife of previous. She was married to this guy. This guy was a very wealthy man. She had never put her bare foot on the dirt in her life. The moment she steps in the mud, she dies. Like the Gemara says in Masechta Gittin about Marsa Bas Baitos. The man has no choice. He grabs his two sons and he schleps them along. What happens? The two kids faint. The man's pulling them. He's schlepping them in the desert. He also faints. He wakes up hours later. He sees laying next to him, his wife is dead. His two kids are dead. And the eyewitness testimony is this man raises his hands to the heavens. And he says, Ribono Shel-Olam, Ribono Ha'olamim. He says, you've done a lot to test me. You've done a lot to give me the opportunity to forsake my religion. He says, Teida ne'amana, but you should know, Ribbon Shalom. Kol yoshvei shamayim, all those who live in the heavens should know. Yehudi ani, I am a Jew. Vil Yehudi eya, I will always be a Jew. And there's nothing that you could do, nothing that will ever happen to me that will stop me from being a Jew. We have over here number 27, a kinnah. Very interesting to me that of all the kinnahs that we say on Tisha B'Av, for the Crusades, for the burning of the Sfarim, there's no kinnah for the Gerushay Sfarad. But actually there was a kinnah that was written. You can take a look at it. It was a kinnah written by the Chacham, Isaac ben Yaakov. And he's Makane, he's Makainen over the Gerushay Sfarad. As the Jews are leaving Spain, the Chachamim paskin the very interesting Shaila, a Hayra Shah. Because as we know, this was taking place the day before Tisha B'Av, when certainly music and live bands would be prohibited. The Chachamim paskin that the leaders of the Jews out of Galus Sfarad, they were led out of Galus by bands, by lively music. They paskin, it was permitted for them to dance their way out of Spain. Why is that? Number one, to inspire them, to give them hope for the future. Not so they shouldn't be demoralized, so they should not be depressed. To give them tikva, to give them hope. In addition, this was their way of showing gratitude to Ribbon Shalom, thanking Hashem that they were zoichet v'mekadei shem shamayim, and they didn't succumb to this great nisayon. And finally, the Gedolei Yisrael wanted to show that Jews never cry when they leave Galus. We cry when we leave Yerushalayim. We don't cry when we leave Galus. And the Jews were led out of Spain by lively music. So here we have a parallel between the Churban on Tisha B'Av and this terrible Churban of Gerushay Sfarad. 300,000 Jews, hundreds of thousands of Jews forcibly converted. But there's another parallel as well. Because just like we know on Tisha B'Av, besides the fact that that was Churban, Chazal tell us in many places that Mashiach was born on Tisha B'Av. That as God brings destruction, as God brings devastation, Ribbon Shalom, mitoich letzara, in the Choshech, is already planting the seeds for the salvation of Klal Yisrael. And by the same token, points out Harav Avigdor Miller Zechatzak Levracha in Rejoice, O Youth. He writes, the largest and most influential Jewish community in history after that which formerly existed in the Holy Land was in Spain. In 52, they were totally expelled. Says Rav Miller, yes, they were expelled. And the greatest heaven until that point of time, which was Spain, was coming to an end. But at that very time, at that very same time, when Spanish Jewry was coming to an end, Christopher Columbus set sail to discover what has been historically the greatest haven for the Jewish people aside from Eretz Yisrael. So while Spanish Jewry was coming to an end, the same way the Ribbon Shalom creates Mashiach on Tisha B'Av, the Ribbon Shalom was already preparing and paving the way for the next great Jewish haven. Says Rav Avigdor Miller, Columbus discovers America in 1492, the most influential Jewish community since Spain. This is the hand of God in history. Not only that, says Rav Miller, the very same king and queen who expelled the Jewish people financed the discovery of America. We'll credit them. The Ribbon Shalom made them the shluchim to finance Columbus's discovery. Even more than that, says Rav Miller, even more conspicuous was the fact that on August 2nd, on Thursday, was the Spanish Inquisition. And on that very day, Christopher Columbus was packing his bags to leave on his voyage to America, which took place the day right after Tisha B'Av, Friday, August 3rd, 1492. In the archives in Seville, Spain, there's a document written by a sailor, Juan de Aragon, who was a cabin boy of one of the boats that took Jews to Africa. He writes that as this boat that took the captives of Spain down to Africa, down the Rio Tinto, August 2nd, 1492. On their way to Africa, they waved and passed by to 3 great ships. The Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, which were berthed in the quay of Palos, preparing to set sail to America the very next day. Could anyone have known that on the great disastrous day of the demise of the greatest Jewish community that Gullus has ever seen, the Rebbeinu Shalom was already paving the way for the greatest Jewish community that was ever in Gullus? So yes, it was a disastrous day. And let's never forget that what happened in Spain, you can never get comfortable in Gullus. Because Rebbeinu Shalom paved the way for us to be here in America. But Reb Chaim Volozhiner tells us America is the last stop, is the 10th Gullus. Don't get too comfortable. The Chassid the Tzror Hamor, Rabbi Avraham Saba, writes something very frightening. And he writes, what was the reason for Gullus Sfarad? The Jews got too comfortable. They built big homes. They built luxurious palaces as if this is their final destination. So we can never get too comfortable. We can never feel like this is our home. Like when the Jews left Spain, the Gedolim Paskin to play music for them, because we don't leave Gullus in a sad way. But just like on Tisha B'Av the Mashiach was born, so too in 1492 the Rebbeinu Shalom had his eye on the future salvation of the Jewish people, and on that very day Columbus set sail to discover the haven that we are in today, and we should be zocheh to be here b'shalom ad bi'askal tzedek meher v'yameinu amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.